Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Continuing on with our impression series, we're going over the rest of the healers that I didn't have in our previous video. We're going to be talking about Disc, Holy Priest, Preservation Evoker, and Resto Shaman, taking into account the latest buffs they just had on January 15th as well. Starting off with Disc, this one's easy because they didn't have any buffs from January 15th. The healing thus far is a little bit weird in a dungeon environment. What's basically happened is now that you have lost Rapture, there is some really strange rigidity happening with the spec. The healing itself feels pretty good with Atonement, but as we were very used to in dungeons using Rapture to give us that breathing room in between the heavy damage going out, we no longer have. Inescapable Torment, Void Summoner, I should say, no longer gives you cooldown reduction from Smite, and it only gives you cooldown reduction for your Squid from Penance and Mind Blast. So what happens is you will use your Squid, you'll use your Mind Blast, you'll hit Radiance, do damage just like you used to, do great healing. Wonderful. Then you're gonna have just your Rift by itself, and then once you get your Mind Blast back for a third Entropic Rift, that'll probably be around the time that you get your Void Wraith, your Mindbender, your Squid back once again. And so that's kind of the style that we are going with, at least at the moment, is having Shadow Covenant and Entropic Rift together, having only the Entropic Rift, and then having them both together once again. You're not getting any more benefit from Bloodlust and Power Infusion to get your Squid back more rapidly or anything along those lines. Still feels kind of just slow and rigid in that regard. We are going to have access to Ultimate Penitence, aka Uppies, and it's a cute ability, and it can often be pretty useful in that solo rift in between your Shadow Covenant cooldown with your Mindbender, but it's still really, really risky because the ground effects will hit you while you're flying in the air, and even though they buffed Ultimate Penitence to give you a larger personal shield, you can still just straight up die through a lot of these mechanics, get killed, and things just start going awry very quickly. Also, with the talent change, you no longer have access to the cooldown reduction for Ultimate Penitence by hitting Penance on cooldown, which means that it's going to be a 4-minute cooldown flat, which means you can basically only use it once per boss fight. And when you use it on trash, or if you use it on trash, you have to be very discerning as to when you use it because, like I mentioned, those ground effects will hit you even when you're flying very high in the sky. Evangelism is going to be easy access for everybody because you're going to have it replacing the Rapture node. But in a dungeon environment, it feels really mid. It's like 4 million healing when you activate Evangelism, spread across 5 targets, which is, a few percentage of health, and that's about it. Really don't know why they added that extra healing component if it's so weak. It doesn't really need to exist there at all. And this is really an area where it is highlighted as being a great tool for raids, but it's just not that needed for a dungeon environment. So I don't know why they have it up there. Add on to that, our dots are really weak since they removed Purge the Wicked, and now it's Shadow Word Pain that we're spreading around to a variety of targets. And they want them to be strong, and they've said that they want them to be strong. So let's do a little thought experiment here. If they make them strong, and then you're going to be doing more healing while you have more targets dotted up with your Shadow Word Pain, that just means during your Shadow Covenant that it's going to cause all these dots to flare up, which means the area you're already strong at when you have your Shadow Covenant out, you're just going to get even more strong. Yay! But that was not ever our issue. We don't need more healing during Shadow Covenant. We have great healing during Shadow Covenant. And so making it so that Purge the Wicked, a radiant spell, which is light and fire, get now changed to be only Shadow, doesn't really assist us in any area that we were weak. In fact, I would argue that Purge the Wicked should stay and be on a choice node with Evangelism higher up on the list, so it would be like an M+ only ability, since we don't really care about Evangelism for dungeons that much. It's, a minor benefit at best. And then make it so that we could have this flare up of light damage for when we don't actually have access to our Shadow Covenant or our Rift. That would actually go really far in helping the spec in those in-between moments of how you could best deal with that damage. Don't know. It would be really nice if there was some other kind of option on hand, but I know they want to reduce cooldown, so it'd have to be something passive, right? Oracle Disc Priest was really weird when I tested it in Mythic Plus. Now, when you look at a breakdown of it, they had made this change to the Oracle talent called Twin Sight. And so basically when you use an offensive penance, it casts a defensive penance. When you use a defensive penance, it does an offensive penance on top of it for free. So I was using the Oracle cooldown reduction to cast multiple penances on cooldown and just keep on casting like 3 or 4 penances in a row and get all this extra healing, all this contrition value, all of it. When you open up the details of an Oracle run, you're like, wow, Aegis did so much. Wow, you know, contrition or shields are a little bit stronger. I could hit Insight and smash a whole bunch of powered shields, and it's like Rapture again. Except the fact that your atonement healing is so much worse in Oracle. There is an insane amount of power in Voidweaver that amplifies your atonement healing, and Oracle still feels like it's just a PvP setup. And I guess that's probably the intention, is they don't want to have it be a massive gap between it. And so if their goal is to make it good enough to do like 10s and 12s with, great. It seems like they're on that path. But overall, Voidweaver still feels way stronger in a variety of ways. The baseline like smite and penance buffs that Oracle receives is just not enough to compete with Void Blast and all the additional atonement healing that it provides for you. Anyway, like I mentioned before, losing Rapture is super noticeable, super annoying. Your shields are also interacting with your tier set bonus, and when they're fully absorbed, they're proccing insurance. And so both when you have a shield on a target and when you have insurance on the target, those are the areas where you're doing increased healing to that ally. That means that you want to be using your shields mostly on cooldown. I would say probably as long as you're not in your rift window and trying to squeeze out more Void Blasts, probably would be using it on cooldown and trying to prefer targets that are going to be taking incoming damage so that the shield is going to get fully absorbed to give you the insurance buff and of course the extra healing onto it. It's okay so far, but losing Rapture and losing Train of Thought, which is kind of like a sneaky talent of giving you the cooldown reduction for your shields whenever you'd cast like Flash Heals or Renew, mainly in a dungeon environment, you'd have these surge procs, and being able to like shield, consume both surge procs and then shield again was actually really helpful on a lot of high damage encounters when you were in between your squid and rift durations. So losing that feels pretty bad too. And in addition, there's a bunch of really weak talents. Expiation is weak because our dots suck. Twilight Equilibrium is still really weak and has been for a while now. Indemnity, which gives additional duration to your atonements placed by your shield, that's really weak since you don't shield as much. Borrowed Time, which is giving you haste based on how much you shield, gets worse when you have a rigid cooldown to your shield. Your dots are weak. There's just a whole bunch of imbalance with the overall kit as it stands right now. And so do not be surprised whatsoever to start seeing a lot of rebalancing coming around for the spec over the next couple of PTR builds. We have a long way to go before we have a final answer, I would say, on disc and like how it's looking. Right now, it seems like there's a lot of tuning that they need to get done with this spec. Now let's get on to the sister spec in Holy Priest. It's been fascinating. Now, if you just heard the disc side, I talked about how there was imbalance with their spec and basically how the pie chart of all your healing abilities is laid out. Holy Priest is very much the same way in that your holy words are really strong, but Prayer of Healing and Renew still have a way to go. Now our tier set is really apotheosis based. When you have apotheosis up, your holy words are applying 1 insurance to your allies. So it'll be the target of your Serenity or one of the allies healed by your Sanctify, and then each active insurance is increasing your overall healing output. This could be pretty helpful for a lot of like burst damage, since that's an area that Holy Priest really struggles with. That being said, whenever people take too much damage, the insurance procs sub 50% HP, and then you lose your healing buff out of that. So Prayer of Healing still feels really weak to utilize. I was trying builds to take advantage of Resonant Words because that also is buffing your Prayer of Healing. Your Lightweaver is also buffing your Prayer of Healing. Still felt really poor. I tested casting Renew a lot and Renew focused builds with like Lasting Words. And the Renew healing itself was not that great, but putting a buff on an ally for 8% more healing was, okay. Not insane. The Empowered Renew casts actually felt pretty decent though. The hot is not huge by any means, but when there's a lot of downtime in encounters and you can get a little bit of extra healing into yourself or somebody else, it wasn't too bad, but particularly what I liked about it was getting cooldown reduction for your Sanctify, because with the new talents, Sanctify actually feels really, really good at the moment. And the range is extended, it's made larger by some of the other supporting talents. So you have like a 40% increase to your Sanctify healing with talents, and they make the range of the placement even bigger on top of that. So getting more Sanctifies is really, really good. Keep in mind, the Voice of Harmony, which triggers additional cooldown reduction for your holy words with other abilities, they changed that in 11.1, so the Divine Star and Halo are giving you Sanctifies back as well. So as long as you're having lots of value out of those holy words, Voice of Harmony and the supporting talents that trigger it are really, really good. Lightwell, they changed it so is losing stacks, or it's spending stacks when players are 75% health or below. And you can kind of put it down as like a healing cooldown, and all of the bolts just start flying all over the place and they get sucked up really quickly, but it didn't really feel that good. Part of this is that Renew is also being applied for a short duration when Lightwell is putting out a little Blessed Bolt. And if Renew's still weak, then you can kind of see the rest, is that you're not getting as much value out of Lightwell. So it was cool, but not that great. Once again, the overall pie chart, if you imagine a pie chart of all the different abilities, is really dominated by your holy words at the moment. It is super focused on them, while your Prayer of Healing and your Renew are just lagging behind. Trail of Light is currently bugged with the last build that I had tested from the time of this video. It was doing more healing than it was intended, so I did some runs with Trail and I did some runs without it, and so far the healing output for Holy Priest feels really good, but I would be worried if they are going to continue rebalancing all of our abilities. They might over-nerf Holy Words and then try to compensate with some Prayer of Healing and Renew buffs. If they can get it right, it could be great for the spec, could be great for gameplay. If they get it wrong, well, Holy Priests know what happens when they get it wrong. When it comes to Preservation Evoker, the gameplay feels really similar. There's some variance you could have with a tier set bonus where your Verdant Embrace is going to trigger insurance on your target, but keep in mind you're not able to echo and then Verdant Embrace and get more insurances on top of it. This is absolutely the worst healer tier set, I think, thus far, gameplay wise. We can worry about like performance and numbers later, but just how you're supposed to activate it is incredibly annoying and not fun to play around, because you have to go get that target with Verdant Embrace, and sometimes in dungeons, but often in raids, it can be incredibly risky to do so. I was trying some Flameshaper Evoker after the changes that they made, so that I was able to get more hasted cooldown for my Engulf, get my breath updates or my breath cooldown resets by stasising my Engulfs and then consuming my breaths or putting them on cooldown, unleash my stasis, get a ton of cooldown reduction for your breaths, get to cast breath again, do more healing, do more damage. It was pretty cool. That being said, I was playing with a full range comp and that felt really bad, but even if I was playing with like a mix of melee and range, there'd still be that other character out at range that would not be getting all this Engulf and Consume Flame healing. So I think we're still going to be going down the path of Chrono Warden and Flameshapers just to make things feel a little bit better when it comes to a raiding environment. The spec still has a lot of like sneaky knowledge required for how you want to amplify all of the healing that is involved in it. There's not that many abilities for preservation compared to other healers, but there's a lot of passives that you have to keep in mind, and a lot of the knowledge as well of like the dungeon environment to do as much healing as you possibly can. That being said, when I was walking into fights that I'd done a few times in PTR and then being able to set up my healing properly, the spec absolutely blasts output, and I don't think that's ever really been the issue for them. Augmentation, of course, was sucking up that Evoker slot when it buffed healers and tanks, which significantly increased their performance. Now that it no longer does that, there's a chance, not a guarantee, but there's a chance that we could not run with Augmentation, because it's living and dying based off of its raw damage that it's providing to the team. So, priority on if it's not providing enough of damage to the group, since it's not giving as much survivability, there's a chance Prez can kind of come back into the meta. The challenge though with Aug is that it's giving a lot more power to those 2-minute classes, and putting together two really powerful 2-minute classes, stacking them onto the Breath of Eons it's just super, super powerful to bring to the table. So unfortunately, they're a little bit dependent on what AUG is going to be doing in the meta. I will say, though, that when it comes to a lot of the burst damage we've seen thus far in the PTR dungeons, the spec does have a really good kit to deal with it. I haven't seen too much pressure from the curses, and that's something we'll probably see from like Rookery testing as well and see how bad that was or how bad it might be. But thus far, I would say that Prez feels really good. It's just a lot of like outside factors that are sort of bothering it, and maybe that's why we're not getting as many changes for like Chrono Warden or like Mythic Plus focus changes, is they might be happy with how it performs, but you know, meta players are just pushing it out somewhat. To wrap it up, let's talk about Resto Shaman. So with the January 15th patch notes, they received an overall healing buff of about 5%, and they received a 25% damage buff to Acid Rain. Some of this is basically to make up for the fact that Ancestral Guidance was removed for Resto, kind of make it feel a little bit better overall. Seem to be pretty solid. There have not really been any Farseer focused changes for the spec to kind of make it feel better in a dungeon environment. They added this talent called Whispering Waves to replace Primordial Wave, where basically when you're casting Healing Wave, it's going to cleave off onto all your targets that have Riptides on them. That's cool talent. Probably, you know, it's a very raid-focused talent because casting lots of Healing Wave in dungeons is just not really it. But what is it is casting lots and lots of healing surges. And the more totemic side of the tree, especially in a Mythic Plus environment, is going to really like this change to the Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. So whenever you cast your Healing Tide Totem, it's baking in the effects of Mana Tide if you talent into it, but also baking in the effect of this Tidal Totem, which is causing your next 3 healing surges to be instant cast and cost half mana. This is obscenely helpful for Resto Shaman and what they're really like trying to do in a dungeon environment, because a lot of times you're sitting there applying Riptides, casting surges, maybe an occasional heal wave, and then letting your totems do all the work when it comes to the chain heal casts. And so having cheaper surges to benefit from and to make Healing Tide a bit better of a cooldown is all really nice to have for a dungeon environment. They also fixed Therazane's resilience with the latest builds, so that might help Farseer out like a little bit. Definitely helps Totemic if you wanted to run with that talent, not having to worry about refreshing your shields or anything like that throughout the run and having them stronger, but it does come at the cost of a little bit of damage reduction from the sister talent on the choice node. Manus, however, still feels like a concern, more so with Totemic Shaman than I would say any other heal spec. Maybe Paladin's kind of close now with the changes they've made to Holy Light's mana cost, but it's very strange having to battle your mana bar with certain specs and then others don't care about it really whatsoever. The imbalance is just, I don't know, it exists, there's no reason for it to exist, and there's not really ways for players to get around it, really, because you can't really restrain your mana consumption in a lot of environments when it comes to Mythic Plus, and the specs that don't have to worry about restraining their mana or don't have to worry about spending their mana or their high value resources aren't punished. But you as like a Resto Shaman are going to be more punished when you're casting all these surges to try to push up health bars and force up health bars quickly to deal with the incoming burst damage. And it's not like you can sit there and have the time to cast heal waves or lean into builds that are incentivizing slow, steady cast of heal waves. That's not really what we're experiencing in these dungeon environments thus far. Healer damage, I haven't really talked about too much in this video because I don't think it's as big of a priority in the War Within or even in Dragonflight, I would argue, the way it was in Shadowlands. So it's kind of cool that Acid Rain's getting a little buff and a passive increase on top of what it has, but it got nerfed before, so it kind of feels like we're just going back and forth, back and forth. The most important things, however, are going to be raw healing output and the dispel profile and whatever else you can add to make it easier on the meta DPS or meta tank specs. So Shaman and their kit for kicks, stuns, interrupts, whatever, rises exponentially when the meta DPS specs or meta tank specs don't bring as much of that to the table. Once Enhanced and even Ellie to some extent were doing really well in the War Within Season 1, Resto Shaman stocks started sliding, not only because of that, but because of disc out bursting it really for the high damage periods. So all of these things are kind of connected when it comes to what could be meta, and all of these things really very much play a role. So those are my thoughts thus far, and we'll be working on some more like performance-based potential tier lists and things like that as we continue with our coverage for PTR testing. So if you're enjoying it, be sure to like and subscribe. And a huge thank you to our patrons who are making all this content possible. If you'd like to join them, check it out in the description down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. I'll catch y'all next time.